So I'm so excited today that we finally have an in-person guest here at Invijo's podcast studio. We built this studio with the idea that we would have guests here on a routine basis. Well, the pandemic and other things had other things in mind, and now we're here. So first, we want to thank anybody that's listening. We're a relatively new podcast, but we're so excited with the momentum we're getting. People are talking about it, asking us to put out more content, and so we have some amazing guests lined up. And probably not that many as amazing as the guest in front of me today, who is someone that I met a few years ago. And the second I met her, she not only lit up the room, I just started seeing things in her career, things that I could see her doing. And then in the last few years, she's been knocking it out of the park. She's a director at World Trade Center of Seattle. She's the co-chair at Columbia's Hospitality DEI Task Force. And she's a Puget Sound Business Journal 40 Under 40 honoree. She's also part of an international women's forum comprised of more than 7,000 diverse, accomplished, and amazing female leaders. I'm here with Emily Cantrell. Emily, how are you doing today?
Hi, good. Thank you for having me. Love the studio. And you also are a 40 under 40.
That's why I snuck that in there. It's kind of a way to pat myself on the back. No, thank you so much. Emily, when I saw your name on that list, it was like I call it kind of the moment where you're like, yeah, I thought she's won this every year she's been, over 30. But it was so cool to see your name on there and some of the other people in the Seattle community. What an amazing community we have. Don't you agree?
Agreed. Yes, for sure.
And so today, we can go so many different routes, right? But within the Seattle community, people know who you are. You connect, businesses, leaders, influencers, and you're making a big impact. But maybe some of our audience don't know who you are. So maybe you can give us a little background about yourself, where you grew up, kind of how you got to this point. So take it away. Tell us a little about yourself.
My really windy path. Sure.
I love it.
So if we're backing up that far, I was born in Texas, grew up in Alaska and Germany. Came to Washington State when I was in middle school. So my parents are in Gig Harbor. Spent the rest of my childhood there. And then went to PLU and then UW-Tacoma and eventually moved up to Seattle for a career in TV news. I was commuting at first, and when you start at 3 a.m., that's not a fun commute.
For sure.
So I've been in Seattle now for almost 20 years now. And I spent almost 10 years in TV in local news, and then I realized I love people, and as much as I loved my coworkers, I didn't want to sit at the same desk day after day. I wanted to get out and meet people, and so I got into sales, but then I realized I missed writing, and so I ended up in the tourism and hospitality industry. Visit Seattle is a place where I've spent I stopped there 2 different times in my career.
Rob Leslie works there. Is that the name?
Yes.
I know him. Yeah, great people.
Yes, led by Tom Norwalk, fabulous team, and they call me Boomerang because I left, but then I came back, and it was amazing there. I got to do a little bit of sales, marketing, communications. This is when I was in international tourism, and that was a blast, and did a short stint at Seafair after that, and then went back to Columbia Hospitality. I did a short stint there too. So yes, I guess I am a boomerang, and I'm back at Columbia Hospitality now, which is the management company for World Trade Center Seattle. We are owned by the Port of Seattle and managed by Columbia Hospitality.
Wow, very cool. Did you say Germany?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that. How old were you, and then how long did you stay there?
Not long enough. 8 to 10 years old.
Wow.
So I left when I was in 5th grade. My parents told me we were moving back to the States, and I just started crying.
You loved it there?
I did. My parents I feel so fortunate that as a child, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but every weekend we would travel to a different country or a different museum, and my parents were really good about making sure we got out to see all the sites. But again, when you're 10 years old, you're like, I don't want to go to another museum. Like,
you
the
can't
Louvre?
really appreciate it, right? You just want to, back then probably, we don't want to date ourselves. We didn't have our iPads to play with as kids, right? But it's like, you can't play with your dolls that long, right? Yep. It's like, the museum sounds cool, this cultural aspect, but I'm 8 years old, so when you're 18, 20, you reflect back and you go, wow, I can't believe I was doing that, right? It's kind of cool. Yeah. Did you do any traveling in college as well? Did you go back to Europe or backpacking, anything like that?
Not back to Europe. I went to Australia. I studied abroad in Australia for about 6 months, and then that's when I did not go back to PLU. That's when I transferred over to UW-Tacoma just as it was opening.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I think, so much international, background in terms of just your experience. You kind of had that culture at an early age. Australia is incredible. It's one of on my list. My son's 6 years old. We all he wants to do is go down there and like get crocodiles and snakes. He's really into that, type of stuff. So that's really cool. I think it kind of helps me understand you a little bit better because, you think about World Trade Center or a place like Seattle. I think on a daily basis, you probably encounter so many different cultures, so many different types of leaders, global economy, everything that's going on there. Tell us a little bit about kind of Seattle right now, right? I think you had an economic forum that you helped put together with the port. I believe that was like around the June timeframe. Was that right? And you kind of really had to adapt to what's going on. But, give us an idea about how that went. And then where's Seattle today and where might we be going as a community?
Sure. So the Economic Summit, it's pretty funny how that came about. So last year, Bell Harbor International Conference Center, we're, again, owned by the Port of Seattle, but managed by Columbia Hospitality. So we have a lot of the same team between both properties. They completed an $11 million renovation. World Trade Center Seattle also completed a renovation, much smaller scale, but big to us. And any given year, in a non-COVID world, we would have a huge party on the pier. And our CEO jokes about, we would have thousands of people, 10 bars set up, live bands all over the place. And that wasn't happening. Yeah. And so instead, he said, hey, let's have an economic summit. And I was really excited because I had just pretty much started my executive MBA. I had gotten done with an economics class, and I had learned so much in such a short amount of time in school where I was so excited to just apply everything that I had learned. And so he asked me if I would be willing to take the lead on it. And so I was able to help produce it. We had 46 speakers over a 3-day period. The Port of Seattle came on board as our presenting sponsor. Awesome. And the focus was all about advancing an equitable and inclusive recovery. So this isn't just an issue that we've been dealing with in the last year, especially, after George Floyd's death. And that's really one of the largest Black Lives Matter movements that we've seen. This is a 400-year issue of systemic racism, dates back to the transatlantic slave trade. And I think a big part of it is just understanding how we got to where we are. And so now we have this pandemic that does not discriminate. Everyone's impacted by it in one way or another. And this is our opportunity now to come up with a plan that doesn't take us back to where we were, but a plan that will help us get to be even stronger than where we were before.
Wow. Yeah, I think especially in Seattle over the years, you've heard things that are going on within our city here. And if you think about the entire world and everything that's what's happening, I think the pandemic did something is we all had time to reflect. And then we all had varying circumstances. Some people's jobs were affected. Some people were more adversely affected from healthcare. But what I really appreciate about the last year, where I think there's some value, is people finally were able to get their voices at least heard. And then they found other voices that were like theirs. And then I think that's one of the things when you're alone, it's kind of hard to raise your hand up or to feel like you're going to be heard. But when you have a collective, it's much easier to stand up, right? And then you feel the support of everyone, and then it continues to grow. So that's been impactful for me as a storyteller, somebody that reflects about things that are going on in society. I'm very sensitive to things that are happening. I'm a musician and a writer, as you are a writer. And so I don't know how many books of poetry and just random musings you've written. Have you been writing a lot, or have you had any writer's block? I feel like I can't stop writing. Like I have to force myself to sleep. How's it been for you?
Everything I read and write is for school right now.
Oh, okay. You're very focused.
It's 16 hours a day. I can't wait until I get to pick up a book for fun and write something for fun, but it's just super intense.
So tell me about the school. So that's another thing. It's hard for people to think about. You're doing pretty well. You have a lot of things going for you. Your career trajectory is obviously off to a fantastic start. You're getting the 40 under 40 recognition. Yet you decided to get an MBA at Brown University. So tell me why. and tell me how that's going. And I'd love to hear about, I think you had a recent trip that you joined some of your teammates. And then lastly, that cool program that I saw you send where you're helping raise some money for the community. I think that's part of your Brown. So there's a lot in there, right?
There's
why did you do
questions.
it? And I can even do a follow-up if you'd like. So I want to know why you're doing it.
Yep.
What made you want to do it, and then how it's going and some of the impact for you personally and how you're impacting the community.
Okay. And all of these are actually my answers. I think they'll all kind of be related. So I had looked into getting an MBA years ago, but nothing caught my interest. And then October 1st, 2017, that's when I was in the Las Vegas shooting. And obviously it survived, but I suffer from survivor's guilt. And my way of healing is just knowing that I am going to take advantage of being here today and try and make this world a better place. But I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so one of my board members, she actually was just starting this MBA, and it's called the I.E. Brown Executive MBA. It's between IE Business School in Madrid, which is one of the top business schools in Europe, and it partnered with Brown University because Brown doesn't have a business school. So it marries the business side of IE with the humanities and social sciences side of Brown. And it's all about doing business for social good and not just profit for the bottom line. And that's what intrigued me about it. I looked at the website after I first learned about it through my board member, and I just got goosebumps and kind of teary-eyed. I was like, I am doing this. I remember exactly where I was. I was at a hotel in Florida attending a friend's wedding. And from that day, I was like, I'm applying, I'm doing it. The application, parts of it were in Spanish, and it took a little while. I had to write some essays.
Oh, that's cool.
But I ended up getting accepted, and we started our cohort. We're cohort 10, so it's a pretty new program. And IE was founded by entrepreneurs, and it's a relatively young business school, but they're really big on entrepreneurship. So acting as an entrepreneur within your own organization, which I really liked. So we all met in Madrid. It's kind of funny, not really funny, but we had the first COVID case here.
Yep.
And this was considered a hotspot. And then I go off to Madrid in March of 2020. I actually didn't know until about 4 a.m. that morning if I was truly going to get to go, because we learned that a student had tested positive for COVID on the Segovia campus, which is where we were supposed to spend the first week. They decided that we would just switch everything to Madrid. And so we met there. The cohort, not everyone made it. We have a few in the medical field, and so they could not leave. And a few just either didn't feel comfortable going or didn't want to risk their family members' health once they got back. So I am glad we went. We kicked it off over there, and then a lot of it's virtual. What you were referring to last week, we were supposed to go to Cape Town, and this is kind of the culmination of everything that we've learned from a class that we had on, it was on slavery, the shared history of slavery and capitalism. And so anything from that class to our entrepreneurial management for executives, corporate strategy, this is where we're supposed to use everything that we learned and apply it on the ground as we perform ethnographic research. So COVID.
Wow. Yeah.
We didn't get to go. It was pretty heart-wrenching. And so on the bright side, instead of having a huge category or a topic that we were going to focus on, we were each assigned an individual client. So our teams were. So I was on a team of 4, and we had our first choice, which was early childhood development. And ECD centers are so important in South Africa, and less than half of the 6 million children there are able to attend one. And so we were assigned a client, Siu Kalisa Daycare Center, owned by Namfundo Twasa, and it's her dream to turn her center into a 5-star center. And originally we went in there thinking we were going to help her with some zoning issues that she was having. And again, because of COVID, we couldn't. So I hate saying the word pivot, but we had to pivot multiple times during the week. We ended up coming up with a 5 steps to 5 stars plan for her. that not only will help her ECD, but anyone who wants to have
kind of a
5
model
star.
that other people
Exactly.
can use. That's really smart. That's so cool. Yeah, I saw that come through, when you had sent it over as part of your programs. It's such an innovative way. I saw the smile on her face. I think you raised over $4,000, right, to kind of kickstart her programs. And you were hoping to raise $1,500 or $1,000, I think.
Yeah.
And now you're making that a template that other people can use. I think that's so powerful to get these smart minds. You're doing an MBA and then you focus on a person. It's amazing how much you could change somebody's life. So I always tell people, somebody within your community can transform the lives of somebody else in their community, right? So like someone that could help another person that if you're just willing to be that connector, right? Somebody's like, I need this, and you hear that, but then you're talking to someone else, and it's about connecting that thread of humanity to say, you can help that person, because people want to help each other, right? It's just hard to connect. And I see you as somebody that's a connector. I've seen you do it. I think when we first met, it was about LinkedIn local events that, Sean and I were doing with Inviho. And, I'll be completely honest. And then I don't think I've ever told anybody there. The reason I started the event is I started seeing LinkedIn locals popping up online, and they were all over the place. So I thought for sure one was in Seattle. Well, there wasn't one. And when I reached out to the person running, it was like a global, like, grassroots campaign. LinkedIn had nothing to do with it. She said, well, you could own the Seattle one. I was like, that's cool. What I really wanted to do is I wanted to do public speaking, right? But as you know, with public speaking, anything you do, you need experience. Well, you can't get experience if you've never done it, right? So I was like, I'm going to create my own panels, and I'm going to be speaking, and that's how I'm going to get my experience. And I love interviewing people. So that's kind of why I did that. And it landed with you because you were a connector of people. And you said, hey, we could bring this to the World Trade Center. We can make it more business. So I remember sitting across from you, and I'm like, we've done like 3 of those events, and we started thinking big, right? And right away, I was like, wow, she connects the dots. She gets that. I don't want just a small event. I want to bring Seattle together in person. And then you started thinking about making it even bigger. So I think that's what you're doing with your programs and with this MBA is you're helping that person think much bigger. And then also it's not a financial thing. $4,000 will run out for her, but you're giving her that 5 steps, right? You're giving her that hope, but then it's through an MBA. So I love that like you've always been a connector to me. So that's kind of, I know that word. And I love that you said you hate the word pivot. Some words I feel bad for, unprecedented pivot. They had, they're the most damage other than, the healthcare side of this pandemic. They're just words, but nobody wants to use pivot anymore. So I guess we'll just transition. To something else. There's my word. So, something else that kind of, when we talk about brand transformers, right? And when we say someone or something or, a company that can actually transform their brand, and it's because the reason we say that is I don't like people thinking they have to be one thing. I think college and the thought of school growing up and taking those ridiculous exams, I think all the exams I took about like what job I'm going to have was one said like, it didn't say this, but I read through it. It's like, you will not amount to anything, right? And then another one was like, services industry or something, but because they're like made for the masses, right? And then you go to school and you get a degree and then you get the job and then you pay your student loans. But I think at 30, 40, 50, doesn't matter your age, you can always change. And I think you touched on it in 2017, that moment you had with the biggest mass shooting in U.S. history in Vegas. I think you were going about your life a certain way. I mean, and just in terms of the trajectory, and you were there to have a good time, enjoy some country music. And then something happened, and I think the trajectory of your life, there was a transformation, right? And it took some time. I'd love for our audience to hear more about that story and just be in your shoes, that day. What were you there to do? And then how did that impact kind of the next few years and maybe the rest of your life? I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So this was one of our favorite weekends of the year. When I say our, it was my fiance at the time, now ex-husband, but we would meet our friends from California in Las Vegas. So this was our 3rd time going to the Route 91 Harvest Festival, and we just loved it because you wake up, you lay by the pool, you get to watch some football, place bets, and then
90-degree weather feels great.
And then go listen to country music. Yes, please. So
sounds awesome.
We loved it, and we were newly engaged, and so we actually went down there with the idea in mind to ask our friends if they would be a part of the wedding. And so it was big ordeal. We were celebrating all weekend, and then Sunday night, that is the night of the shooting, it was the very last act when the shooting happened. And I just remember the sound of it. The first round, my ex had said, "Who's the asshole that brings fireworks to a show?" And you kind of laugh, and then the next round went off, and the woman to our right went down and was covered in blood. And so that's when we realized that something really bad is happening. And I've actually hated guns my entire life. I don't know where that came from. I don't know if growing up in Germany, if I saw something about a shooting, but I've been scared of guns since I was about 10 years old. And I unfortunately have had a few encounters with them, being held up at gunpoint after a different show somewhere else in the country. Wow. And then in college at PLU, my friend's dad was shot and killed on campus in a murder-suicide. And so this was that night. It was my worst nightmare coming true, because I've never been someone to say, "Oh, it'll never happen to me." I've always known that something bad could happen. I also still believe you need to live your life and not be in fear all the time. Sadly, being in TV news for so long, I am kind of a paranoid person. Absolutely. So when that happened, we ran, we dove, we did that over and over, because it was 80 to 100 bullets every burst, every round, and there were several. So it went on for hours. People woke up the next day. They knew how many people died, how long it lasted. They knew the name of the gunman. But we didn't know any of this because, we were still in hiding. We were getting reports that there are multiple shooters, still in lockdown. So we were living in fear, not just for the 10 minutes of the shooting, but for the following hours. We all got separated. The four of us were separated. A couple ended up together. And then, to this day, we still live in fear. So it was a life-changing night. And again, just survivor's guilt, looking at the police report and seeing that there were 6 bodies that were found within feet of where we were standing. So we feel very fortunate to have survived, but now I can't just go on with my normal life. And so when I was on the airplane coming home, that's when I knew I wanted to do something. And as soon as I got back to Seattle, I started researching gun advocacy, gun responsibility organizations, and I started being involved with Washington Ceasefire, and I was on their board. And then more recently, I joined the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. I've been on the board for a couple of years now. Spent the last 3 legislative sessions testifying down in Olympia. I just testified virtually this week, actually.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for turning it into something that will hopefully save lives in the future. It's one of those things, growing up, I've heard, bombs and gunfire kind of growing up in the Middle East and some of the, stuff we went through. And it's kind of interesting. You never want to get used to that sound, mm-hmm. right? And there's just a certain cadence to that sound that doesn't sound like it. People say firecrackers, kind of, but it doesn't. And you'll never forget that sound. But I think what you've done now is you've transformed into someone who is, it's who you've always been, actually. Obviously, I think it's just a different way. It's you now care about a cause that's greater than you, but something that personally impacted you. In some of my philanthropy work, I do nonprofit work that Inviho does too. It almost always takes people a personal thing or a personal touch to actually want to help their community or help a certain type of program. Right. And what I always say is I wish as a community we can start helping before it impacts us personally. By the time it impacts you, it's not that it's too late, but we have to think about each other. So you advocating for, and testifying, I think that's something that just shows who you are as a person, because it's still it's still under the surface, very close to you. And I can feel that emotion from you, but you need to speak about it. I think you and I talked a little bit about when you have such an emotional story. And I think this is important for people to hear. You want to tell the story, but it's so close to our hearts and it's so painful. And we sometimes have to go through therapy and stuff to get through it, that you can't truly tell it the way you want to tell it. Right. So, but I'm glad that you're doing this advocacy. I'm glad that you're helping people, and we're here to support you in whatever way. And I think this platform is one platform. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing in the community in the future for us to support it, because I think advocacy is one thing, but caring about truly caring about the community is just, it sounds like who you've always been.
And real quickly, I just
yeah.
want to say, going back to what you were saying about sometimes you need to be personally affected or someone is affected before you get involved with the cause. And I'm guilty of that. I mean, I had been scared of guns my entire life, but I didn't do anything about it. And it took me going through what I did to finally take action. And so when I testify, that is the first thing that I tell people too. Don't wait until you have your own story to tell. I don't want you to ever have your story to tell. So I really agree with what you said. And the more people that can get involved with something that they're passionate about before they're affected, that's ideal.
Yeah, there's another community that's like that, like the elder community that, sometimes people in older ages, they get left behind because, a lot of philanthropy, a lot of money goes to children, rightfully so, some of those diseases. And then these people that have paid into taxes, programs their whole life and are kind of aging out of some of that support and some of the stuff, they kind of get left behind. So I think until you have an aging parent, you might not think of that. So right. As a younger person, I've had kind of insight into that. So I've made it a part of what I like to do. And my children too, is you got to care about the entire community. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for sharing that. I know it's deeply personal, but I think it's important and it tells people a little bit more about you. So I'd like to ask you a couple of other questions. So I think we've covered some really cool things there in terms of your background, that incredible story that you just shared. And now I think thinking about Seattle today, right? So in VHO in this podcast for the Brand Transformers, we're looking to interview a lot of people, but what we realize is Seattle is just full of so much talent, so many great stories. Tell me a little bit about Seattle today. Where do you see partnerships maybe happening and within the business community, World Trade Center? Do you feel like we're going to be a in-person world, sooner than later? Is it going to always be kind of a hybrid world since you have a big background in events? How do we get the community back together and then really start this recovery effort? I'd love to hear some more insights from you on that.
I think hybrid is here to stay because I think companies are starting to see the benefit of it in that it can be less expensive. Say there's a massive conference. Normally people come together, 500 rooms at a hotel. Well, now there can be 5 different locations around the world. People don't have to travel as far. And so having different remote locations, I think, will be here to stay, as well as making it possible for attendees to attend virtually or in person. Yep. I also think people are so anxious to get out and be face-to-face. In the surveys that we've done and the conversations that we've had, people just want to know that it's safe. So once it all depends on the mandates. Once they're lifted, people get vaccines. Do think people will be itching to have in-person meet. I mean, it's amazing to be sitting across from you right now. And
it feels weird.
Not staring at a Zoom screen. And that's also what we heard at the summit. We had 46 speakers, and some of them, I can't remember if it was the president of Alaska Airlines, but someone had said, I don't think it was him, I think it was someone else, but someone had said, thank you for giving me a reason to put on a suit today. I haven't worn a suit in months. And so people appreciated it. And then they had we were physically distanced on stage. We had 33 speakers in person, I believe, and the rest were virtual. But being 6 feet apart on stage, the interaction, it's so different. You can't recreate it on Zoom. And so a few of our speakers said, wow, I have forgotten what it's like to meet in person. And we can't have this conversation online. It's a lot easier to interject or just play off of each other. So it's just, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years. Commercial real estate is still going strong.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah, I think co-working spaces will continue to be popular. People just want to know that they're safe.
That's funny you say that about co-working spaces. So, we have our offices, we have various spaces, but being at home with my family for so long, and I have 3 kids and everything, and then, balancing business and that, I was the same way. I was like, I got to go to the office. It's like I needed that separation. I enjoyed it for almost a year.
Right.
But I can see that happening, with some of the virtual events we're doing now. It's kind of a mix of pre-recording. So having that impactful story, having something that tells the story of the brand. Why is the audience even watching this? Or maybe it's a pre-recording of an executive, so they're not like nervous on camera, on screen. And then there's the live element, because people want to feel engaged. They want that feel of, maybe it's an MC, maybe I'm participating, live feeds and things like that. But I always think about, in a year from now, I think that the in-person experience is going to need to wow people.
Yeah.
And then I think our bar is not going to be very high, but I think because we're like, we just want to get out.
Right.
Like, I can't wait to go see a show and like get goosebumps when like that first song comes on, and then they're like, oh man, like some smelly guy sweating on you. I'm like, thanks, buddy, give me a hug.
Spill a beer on you.
Spill a beer on me, buddy. It's all fine, But I think we also need to think about the user experience. So now events can't be the same going forward. And you're right, there's an audience out there that's just going to be digital going forward. Or I might not be able to attend your breakfast or your luncheon in person, but I will make a donation, or I'll participate at my house at 7:00. And now society is accepting of that. It's not rude, right?
Yes.
And now we can raise more money for the community. So we've seen community nonprofits grow exponentially this year, because they didn't have to do a big in-person event with the stakes and the chairs and the step and repeat and the glitz and glamour, but they did it virtually, and it was successful. So the overhead went down, profitability went up, but their audience is like, it better be in person next year, because we're missing it. So it's weird, right? It's interesting. Even talking to you, I'm finding myself talking more, because I'm used to doing this podcast with an iPad, and then I would pause and then the iPad would start talking, right? So it's just weird, and we'll figure it out. Like, handshakes will be awkward forever now, right? It'll be like, are you a fist, elbow, high five, air five?
Do you think they'll come back? I'm curious about handshakes and business cards.
I think there's something about that. So I think, is it Japanese culture where they don't really touch and there's and they bow? I think so, right? I think there's going to be an element of that. I was always a germaphobe, so this freaked me out. I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a president's club with my wife. We had just finally, the kids were at home. We haven't gotten away in 6 years. So we went to this president's club for 3 days in Puerto Vallarta. We had like a blast. Unfortunately, Kobe Bryant passed away as we were at the airport, right? So we hear that story, and I'm like, unbelievable. And I'm a Twitter guy, so I'm looking at Twitter and I start seeing all the stuff happening in Italy, and I'm like, this COVID thing's kind of, it's a real deal. So we land at the international gate, and it's still January 30th, but now that I kind of sit back and I think about it, I'm like, on that plane, people were looking at me weird because I took out my Sani wipes and I wiped down the seat and I wiped down the tray. And then everyone's like, dude, you're a germaphobe.
Yeah.
And I was that guy before COVID.
I was too.
Right? And then people look at you, and then that person that's like, can I have one? Yeah. And you're like, sure. It's like that Seinfeld, can you spare a square? And I'm like, here you go, And then now I'm like, I haven't been on a plane since, but when I get on a plane, I'm going to be in like a space suit probably compared to how I was. But I actually think the airlines should have always been this clean.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I should have always opened up the tray and not found crackers from the kid before and like weird sticky stuff. So this sucks. We all know that, but some benefits are going to happen. And I think the in-person experience, if we can wow our audience, make it memorable, they're going to go on social and brag about it and do this stuff. And then you have this TikTok world that's kind of crazy. I don't even really get how it works. And I'm just like, oh, you're a content marketing company. Tell me about TikTok. I'm like, I can't do it. I just can't do it. Because it's different than the content we do. We're like all about like polished content. And then these kids are doing like remarkable creative 3-second videos that blow my mind, and then go 50 million in attention. So that part, I think we're in a transition period,
Yes.
and I'm just happy that Seattle has somebody like you that's a connector. You're getting this incredible education that you're overlaying on an already successful career. You're continuing to help the community. So I'd like to say, like, please stay in Seattle. If something else, we'll talk about it, but don't leave our city. So this next part is something we love to do. I appreciate the entire conversation, but we're going to have some fun now, right?
All right.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to transition to a segment we call IPAs and KPIs. And so we're going to take out some IPAs and we're going to have a good time.
Love it.
KPIs, IPAs, KPIs, IPAs, KPIs. Looking at the world through the employee's eyes.
So for Emily Cantrell, because she is a modern leader for the modern age, she's connecting people, communities. She's continuing to get better in her own craft by getting an MBA. So we're going to be having Orderville Modern Times beer in honor of Emily Cantrell. Emily, let's have a sip of this beer. We'll do a virtual cheers here. I guess we're in person. It's not virtual, but it's a
Cheers.
socially distant cheers. Love it. Not bad. It's
And
also
it's
a vegan beer, which is fantastic. Being somebody who's
tasty.
plant-based, now I have to think about all the other beers I've drank and the lies I've been telling for the last year about being vegan.
Or
So-
they all are, and this one just advertises it by clearly saying this beer is vegan, which is
Amazing marketing on their end, and it's the only beer I'll ever drink. So if you're listening, Modern Times Beer, I'll send you my address. And but actually, very fantastic and smooth. So we'll talk about. So the IPAs, we covered that. Modern Times, I really do see you as a leader for the modern age. KPIs is something we add to it because I think the measurement of progress, success, projects, whatever it is, I think the KPIs, which if some people are listening don't know what it is, key performance indicators, there are opportunities for us to measure where we're at and then measure where we're going, kind of check in on that. Do you have a way that you measure either success, progress in your career, something you look back to and say, okay, I'm on the right track?
Yes, a couple of ways. I mean, the professional way, the goals that are given to me that I need to hit, and that is a measurement of my success. So whether it's membership, sponsorship, the type of events that we put on, attendance. So there are KPIs for everything that I do in my daily career. Personally, where I feel when I feel successful, it's when I run into someone and they're like, guess what? You introduced me to so-and-so and we just met and now we're working together. I love those stories. I love the conversations.
You're a connector, I'm telling you.
It's so fun. And I love the conversations that happen within our walls in a non-COVID era. One story recently that just made me feel so happy. It was during our Board of Governors meeting, which we held virtually in December. And Alejandro Grajal, the CEO of Woodland Park Zoo, he thanked us because he had reached out to me weeks prior and he was a bit frantic. There was a shipment that was stuck at the Port of Seattle and he was wondering if we could connect him to the right person to get the things out of it. Well, I didn't realize it, but it was all the lanterns for their huge show.
For the zoo lights?
Yeah,
Oh, I
it's,
went there. It was insane. It was so beautiful.
It's a new display. I think it's like wild lanterns. And so it was the first time they had done the show. And so because we were able to make that connection for him, they got everything in time and the exhibit was able to be up and running.
Wow.
And so stories like that, that's where I feel good about the work that we do and just being able to, connect people and
That's so cool. It's awesome that the way you measure it is kind of anecdotal with storytelling and stories because what we do is storytelling and it's hard for people to quantify how impactful a story is in marketing, for example,
Right.
especially if you're telling like an enterprise corporate story and they're used to going like to exhibit booths and selling in a booth at an exhibit hall. And you say, no, you should tell a story about your brand or your customer. How does it help, right? So I think stories really transcend metrics, likes, that doesn't matter, right? Shares, that doesn't really matter. What matters is how does it impact people? Right. It's funny, this is one of those connector stories because me and my kids, we went to the zoo lights at Woodland Park Zoo. They did just such a majestic job this year, really kind of helping us escape what's going on. Yes. And go to the zoo, not see any animals, but see these incredible pieces of art. So, one of the exhibits literally wouldn't have been there if you didn't make that connection. Yeah. So it just kind of shows you, reminds me of those Banner Bank commercials, and we're all some way connected to Banner Bank, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of a funny way because it is all connected. One thing I'm going to say is I like making predictions. I like seeing things come true that I kind of envision. I'm about, without being too cocky, I'm about 95%. It's like Nostradamus level. Yeah, they used to call me the Lebanese Nostradamus back in the day. I don't know where that name went, but I foresee you being the mayor of Seattle.
Oh wow!
And I know you're smiling, but you're like, yep, I do too. Here's why. I think those type of roles are gonna need an injection of new thought, new partnerships, new connections, and also a partnership with the private sector in a way that's never happened before, but also that social consciousness, right? To think about diversity when you're hiring, to think about, police reform when needed, right? To think about gun control when needed, right? And so your background, your ability to be someone who's been in so many different cultures, who continues to pursue different cultures to understand different things. I think us being such a melting pot here in Seattle, I see that being a role for you as a connector, because I think mayors, those type of folks, and we have some great mayors here in Washington. Mayor Robinson is in Bellevue, is a friend of mine, and what she's done in Bellevue is remarkable, right? I mean, it's one of those things, and I think Seattle, a lot of people like to talk about Seattle. Seattle is so iconic, and it's gonna come back, and it's gonna be better than ever, and it's gonna need someone that kind of injects that youthful exuberance, but then also have that idea, that experience. What would something like that? How does that sound to you? If you were the mayor of Seattle, and let's say in 5 years, what would that feel like?
Well, first of all, I have zero desire for that.
Damn
although my CEO does say the same thing.
Oh, that's good.
And I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I am considering running for city council.
So you're saying I'm like 97% correct now, huh?
So yeah, it's not mayor. I know who knows what will happen.
It's all stepping stones in life, right? And I mean, you might do city council, and by the way, please do, and we would love to support you. I mean, it's,
thank you.
I think anything you've really gone after, I've seen you attack it with such passion. I remember hearing about your MBA, and I was kind of thinking, wow, that's kind of cool that she's going to do that. Now I've seen you kind of where you've taken that, even during these circumstances. So I think Seattle will benefit from any involvement that you'll have. And like I mentioned before, I don't care what other city wants to take you. We'd like to keep you here. And, if we think about everything we've talked about, right? One thing I love to do, because it's hard, is trying to be succinct. And this is a guy that loves to talk, right? So it's hard for me to get things in like one sentence or in one word. It's even harder to encapsulate what I'm about or what somebody else is about into a hashtag. But I kind of love to do that with our guests. So I'd love for you to think about who you are, where you're going, what you're about, and try to kind of put it all into a hashtag. Maybe something positive for people to aspire to be. Maybe it's just something that you kind of feel very deeply. But is that something you might be able to do? Think of a hashtag that kind of defines who Emily Cantrell is.
Is there a character limit?
No, you can go pretty far.
So, okay, I actually didn't put much thought into this, but I would say hashtag be gentle. And I say that because you never know what someone else is going through in their life. And this is something that I realized after the Vegas shooting. I would walk around Green Lake and just, PTSD, head on a swivel, and just wanting to wear a shirt that says, like, I went through something. Be gentle, be kind. Yeah. And it's something that I also need to remind myself when I see someone walking slowly in a parking lot, or you never know someone's story. So I think if we are all just more gentle with each other, the world could be a better place. Hashtag be gentle.
Wow. That's amazing. You're an amazing person, and I really mean that. It's hard to be gentle all the time, especially when, you know, I know you're working like 20-hour days, and you know, and some people have family homes they go to or family lives that's crazy, you know, chaotic, and then you see them at work, and then we come in with judgments, preconceived notions because of our own lives, you know, and it's hard to think what goes on in somebody else's brain. It's literally impossible, right? So the idea of being gentle and kind and just approaching that situation instead of being attacking or, you know, trying to defeat the other person, we're all going to be better. So I've seen you do that. You're so gentle in the way you take care of our city and then the people, and especially that South Africa story, and then the kindness you've showed a person you don't even know and how you've changed her life. I think that shows that you are a gentle person, you're a gentle soul, and you don't just say, you actually do what you say. And so we're so honored to have you with us on this podcast, our first in-person, in-studio. Thank you so much for being here. But I think my audience would be upset if I didn't ask one last question. So Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains. You probably get this question all the time, but I'm a Seattle music guy. What's the relation? Is he related to you? We'd love to know.
My dad would say absolutely. I think he told someone at Costco that.
Perfect.
No relation.
No relation. Okay,
Sorry
this
to disappoint
podcast
you.
is over, and we will not air this. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, Alice in Chains, Jerry Cantrell. You know, that's why I love this city. It's like, you know, your name pops up, and I'm like, I wonder if she knows him, and if I can, you know, maybe get some studio time out of it. But Emily, I really mean it. Thank you. We look forward to following you in your career trajectory. Whatever you decide to do, we're here to help. And thank you so much for being here on the Brand Transformers podcast.
Thank you, Ahmad. Appreciate it.
We appreciate you.
The Brand Transformers podcast is brought to you by Enviho, where brand science meets creative vision. Every brand has a story. We're here to help you tell it.